Nicky, Rich, I can't wait to jump into what is the first Entrepreneurs United book review that we've ever done. We talk about books on this podcast so much, but we've never stopped and talked about one book for an episode. And through a previous episode here with Nicky Billou, we actually discovered that one of our favorite books for all three of us is Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. So today we're in for a great discussion around this book. From the three of us. One of our prior guests, Michelle Nedlick, called it the Bible of business. It could also be called the Bible of self-help and entrepreneurism and a whole bunch of other things. But Napoleon Hill's book came out in 1937. It's one of the best-selling self-help books of all time.
Yep.
And let's just jump around and go around the horn just to start. When did you first read this book? Nicky, we'll start with you. When did you first read this book, and why is it so important to you and your path?
I actually got a copy of this book when I was 18 years old by a fellow named Roy, and right now I'm not recalling his last name. And he signed it for me when he gave it to me, and I didn't read it immediately. It actually sat on my shelf for years, and then in my 20s. I picked it up and I started reading it because that's when I was getting into my self-help journey. In 1989, I was 21 years old. I did the Silva method back then, and a couple in Canada, Janet and Jonathan Kramer, taught it. And once I did that program, I was hooked on self-help and personal development and becoming better, stronger, faster, Altius, Fortius, and all that good stuff. And one of the things that they were really into was reading good books. And they mentioned that I should read, and everyone in their program should read, Think and Grow Rich. And a light bulb went off in my head. I have that book. Someone gave it to me as a gift when I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
And, I was, I think, 22, 23 at the time where they said this. So I went home. I picked up the book. I read Roy's inscription to me. Roy Mavley, that was his name. Roy Mavley. Great man. And I read the book. And the rest is history. It opened my eyes. One of the things that really struck me about that book immediately was the power of a definite purpose. Napoleon Hill really spoke about the importance of having a narrow focus, aim in life, a definite purpose in life. And that really, really was a revelation to me. And it's something that really assisted me in moving forward, because when I read that book, my career was floundering somewhat. I got my undergraduate degree, then I got my master's degree at Georgetown University. I graduated magna cum laude, but it was a recessionary time, not too different from now, if you think about it. And so my career was floundering, and I read that book, and the definite purpose that I had was that I was going to get a career-oriented job in high technology. That was my definite purpose. And within 6 months, I'd landed such a job, and it was a demonstration of having a definite purpose and pursuing it and what that could do for me.
John, he envisioned a particular job, and within 6 months, he landed that job. I'm not sure what you were planning to share on this, and you're smiling, so I think you know where I'm going to tee it up for you.
I did.
But you had something you were planning for with definite specificity that ended up turning out.
Yeah.
Were you planning to share that, or am I making you uncomfortable?
I wasn't planning on sharing it because I was just thinking entrepreneurism and business.
Okay.
And this is not that. And I was smirking for exactly what you're talking about. And I might as well
Right
share
where I
it
was
now
going.
while it's apropos.
Yep.
But similar to what happened to you, Nicky, I remember exactly where I was. I was on a plane It was Y2K. And the reason why I remember is I wasn't sure. Everybody was worried if the plane's going to fly, what's going to happen, the clocks are going to turn, whatever. And it was January 1st, Y2K. And I was on the plane, and I had Think and Grow Rich that I had read at some point around that period, and it was resonating with me. And there was another book that I had read as well, sorry, it was Anthony Robbins' Personal Power. There's other things going on, and I was looking to settle down. I was kind of like, I'd like to find, somebody that, what is my life if I want to marry somebody in the future? Like, what am I looking for? What is it? And I took out a piece of paper and I jotted down 34 things I was looking for in a partner. And it was in my daily planner. We used to have daily planners back then. And we put everything down. I had my 34 things, and I kept that piece of paper. I kind of forgot about it. And 4.5 years later, at my wedding reception, I had found the paper before the wedding reception. I pulled it back out, and I read the list. And my wife accomplished, or not I accomplished achieving 33 of the 34 things on my list of what I was looking for in a partner. Miraculously, because I didn't go around the bars or around town and go, hey, you fit this, you fit that. I put it away. I didn't even think about it anymore, but I consciously wrote them down, and I was able to look my wife in the eyes when I was marrying her and go, you're the woman of my dreams. You're exactly what I was looking for.
That's awesome. I know I read the book probably around similar time as you did the first time, which would have been in our 20s.
Yep.
And loved it. As a matter of fact, this is the actual book that I have these little tabs and stuff. And I've got highlights in here from literally 20, 25 years ago. They're actually different color highlighters. I don't even remember how many times I've read this book. And I don't know in the current version of the book, if I cite a page number, if that's going to be the current version. I don't know what copyright they're on. But John, your story, I wrote down a couple of things here, and your story reminds me of one of them. On page 74, it says, your subconscious mind recognizes and acts only upon things which have been well mixed with emotion or feeling. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting because one of the philosophies in Think and Grow Rich is, yes, definiteness of purpose. And then it's also revisiting that, like keeping that front and center. But you didn't revisit it. You said you wrote these 34 things and then you kind of put it away. Maybe you read it another time or two. And 4 years later, all of a sudden, here's what happened. And miraculously, you could check the box on all 34. I don't think it's that miraculous. You actually followed these principles by your subconscious was acting on something and recognized because it was well mixed with emotion and feeling. When you wrote that list of 34, you must have had so much emotion and feeling about the perfect person coming into your life that all of a sudden it looks like the world kind of bends to our definiteness of purpose when we have emotion and feeling mixed into it that way. So what you just described perfectly fits into one of the principles that I had as a takeaway that strike me most about the book.
Yeah, I love that. And Rich, you articulated when the book affected you. And you said something too that, Nicky, I'm curious on your end. Certainly doing this book review revisited for me the concepts of the book and reading it back over again. This is that type of book that reading once is not sufficient. Reading once a year is probably the right boundary. But if you read this book, say, I read that book before and I'm just going to listen to it, go read it again. Like, this is the type of book you cannot overread. And every time you read it, you're going to pick up something else and something else and something else. And so I'm just curious because I'm going to claim to be the one who probably just read it the least. Because I don't typically reread things. I've definitely read it the first time. I've definitely read did the Audible. I did the Blinkist. And I've looked up some articles on it in preparation again to remind myself of everything for this. How many times have you guys read the book, both of you?
I read it 3 times and I listened to it on CD back in the day, probably 2 dozen.
Wow.
Wow. I'd say I read it cover to cover, maybe twice. I have reviewed, I know twice because there are 2 different color highlighters and there are tabs. And so I know cover to cover twice. And I've reviewed what I've highlighted probably half a dozen times in addition to that, just to get refreshed with the concepts.
Okay, love it. And so for those who are listening to this who have never read the book, first of all, you can't just listen to this and say, okay, I now got it. But to bring things full circle, if I may, guys, let me go through the 10 basic principles that this book goes over. And I'd love to hear from both of you. What is one principle that really has resonated with you guys the most according to this book, and maybe one that hasn't? But the principles real quickly are: 1, know your goals and have a burning desire to go get them. 2, failure is not the end. It's a lack of faith. It's a fear that is the end, not a lack of failure. Have specialized knowledge. Number 3. 4, you have to imagine, you have to dream. 5, when you get defeated, adjust the plan and go back again. 6, overcome procrastination. 7, willpower and persistence is key. 8, affirmations and self-talk. 9, the sixth sense, your gut feeling. And 10, overcome negativity in your life and move forward positively. Those are the 10 principles that I boiled everything down to in terms of, recapping. Nicky, which one for you is kind of like, that's the one for me that just pounds home?
Well, for me, I look at the various chapters and the things that he thinks about more than the way you boil down the principles.
Okay.
The 2 things that were most impactful for me were creating a mission statement.
Yep.
Right. A definite purpose statement, I think, was what he called it. I've done that. That's been powerful and impactful. And the power of sex transmutation is one of the chapters in the book where he talks about how you can take the power that you have inside of you for your sex drive, and if instead of going out there and just focusing on having a lot of sex, you take that power and you bring it into your life and into your business life and into achieving your goals. That can really make things happen. There was a period in my life where I did that for about 12 months. I just completely, and this was when I was a young man with big testosterone drives, right? Mm-hmm. And I decided that for this 12 months, I was just going to go after my goals and not focus on all that other sex stuff. And man, I achieved like you wouldn't believe, because the amount of power and energy that I had was through the roof, and it wasn't being dissipated. And he talks about that in the book. And I remember reading that, not liking what he had to say about that, because I'm like, damn it, man, I want to have a lot of sex here. He's telling me basically, don't have a lot of sex, take that energy and put it into your life. But he was right.
Yeah. Well, I typically live a life of abundance, so I never read that chapter.
Wait a minute. There's some interpretation.
Hey, that's BS. Maybe you ignored the chapter, but I'm sure you read it.
Rich,
John,
how about yourself?
What was the first section that you read? Because your sections were a little different than mine, probably because
it wasn't sections as much. It wasn't sections in the book specifically as it was. Here's my 10 takeaways or principles that I kind of got from it in no particular order that to me like kind of resonated throughout the book. And I was curious if those principles, if there's anything in those that hit you guys more than the other.
Yeah. So the very first section in the one that I have, and mine's copyright 1966. I obviously didn't buy it in 66. It predates my birth. But the copyright 1966 one, the very first section is called Thoughts Are Things. And towards the very end of that section, in my version of the book, it's page 31. It says, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve.
Yeah, I remember that.
I really believe that if there's something that we can conceive in our mind, we've created this in our mind, we can envision this in our mind. And if we really believe it, I really believe that we can do it. And the obvious example of that, John, is I recently shared with our listeners that I'm on a path to doing a triathlon Olympic distance. I've never done such a thing in my life. And I made the commitment to do that at 314 pounds after getting kicked off of a roller coaster ride. And at that moment, I literally conceived, I'm going to do a triathlon. Like, what is the opposite of where I am in my health? I'm going to do a triathlon. And I believed that if I stay disciplined, if I do the right training, if I get a good coach, if I have a nutritionist, if I do all the right things and I put in all the hard work, I really believe that I can make it happen. And I will tell you today, I am 20 and a half weeks out from when that was conceived. And I am 36 weeks out from when I'm going to do that triathlon. I have no doubt in my mind that I'm going to achieve that. I've never done it before in my life, but it was conceived. I could not believe more. I'm also putting in the work. That's part of my belief, is I believe because I'm working hard. I'm staying disciplined. I'm doing what it takes. I know I'm going to achieve it. It's not even a doubt. So when I reread that, knowing that we would do this book review, I was like, oh my gosh, is that speaking to me nowadays?
Yeah, very good. I really like that. That's excellent. That's a big deal, right? Being 314 pounds and taking an Olympic level triathlon, that's no joke, man. That's no joke. So good on you, buddy. Well done.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I mean, when you think about what you're doing, Rich, and you think about this book, right? Obviously, the title is Think and Grow Rich, but you can think and do anything, right? I think that's the message that really comes across in this book is, he focused on rich. Well, there's a lot of people that want to have a great marriage. There's the example I talked about being Amy. At the end of the
John, I think rich is up for definition. In the story that Nicky told, rich was getting this job he wanted. In the story you told, rich was finding a partner he wanted. Exactly. In the story I just told, rich is getting healthy and using my body in the way I want it. I think rich is up for definition in the eye of the beholder, but it is think and grow in whatever way you want that's rich to you.
Exactly. And that's exactly where I was going to go with this, Rich. And in today's words, what we hear a lot, which is similar, is do you have a growth mindset?
Yes.
And if you think about all of these principles that I talked about, my takeaways from the book, right? Don't accept failure, think positively, overcome negativity. All of them are really encompassed in, do you have a growth mindset? Do you look at every situation and go, poor me, I'm never going to be able to do this? Or do you really overcome with the power of your thinking to positively influence yourself in the right direction? So to me, this whole book is a version, it's a self-help book, obviously, is a version of that. And for me, as an example, one of the areas that really resonates with me throughout this is persistence. Failure's not the end. And the best quote that I love personally to combat your quote is, when defeat comes, accept it as a signal your plans are not sound, rebuild your plans, and set sail once more towards your coveted goal, right? As an entrepreneur, you are going to fail. You're going to fail potentially often. If you can't pick yourself back up, have introspection, dial it back in again, and go back out, and you just take failure as the option, it is the end. You've lost faith in what you're doing. And to me, that was one of the biggest messages of this book is have growth mindset. You got to keep going. You got to keep building. You got to keep going after it. To me, that was the biggest message for me.
I want to double down on what you just said with a totally separate quote from the book that resonates for me is, every man is what he is because of the dominating thoughts which he permits to occupy his mind. I believe the key area in that sentence is with which he permits to occupy his mind. That what you just described, John, was very much about what is in your control, and it's the persistence. And instead of focusing on the failure, you don't permit your mind to do that. You permit your mind to now focus on adjusting your plan and go back, right? I think this, which he permits to occupy his mind, there is a permission that we have an opportunity to give about where our mind focuses, and we control that. And at the time that we believe we don't control that, I believe we subject ourselves to feeling like a victim. Well, this just happened to me. I just focused over here. And when you really think of it as it's about what you permit to occupy your mind, And that is who you will become. I think that's the magic right there.
Yeah, and there's Napoleon Hill in that book plays a little bit coy, and he said that the key secret to having anything you want is something that's um, you got to read this book and you got to figure it out for yourself. He doesn't come out and say it, right?
Yep.
And he tells a story of this young black girl who in the early 1900s her mom was working for um, a rich white man who had not paid her 50 cents that he owed her. And this fellow was um, an irritable, ornery fella. And this young black girl, like 6, 7, 8 years old, walks up to him and says, excuse me, mister, but you owe my mammy 50 cents. And can you please pay the 50 cents? And he just looks at her and he goes, what are you talking about? Get out of here. I'm busy. And she just got all meek and said nothing and just stood there. And he went about his business and noticed she was still there. He got, oh, you're still here, man. And she stood there meekly and, took it from him, but didn't go anywhere. And then he came to her and he started to yell at her one more time. And then he's, in the book, it says she looks at him with this fierce glow in her eyes and says, my baby's got to have that 50 cents. Give me that 50 cents, mister. And that big, tough, strong white man in the early 1900s was intimidated and cowed by this 7-year-old black girl, meekly handed her the 50 cents, and she went upon her day. They said people looked at that and said, what just happened? And Napoleon Hill said that in this story lies the lesson of the whole book. And when I first read that, I didn't get it. I go, well, what is the lesson? That you got to yell at somebody, to get what you want? No, but the lesson is be like the Greeks, during ancient times when they went after Helen of Troy. Burn the ships behind you. Leave no other option but victory. Because that's what that little girl did. She had no other option other than getting that 50 cents. She was not going to go anywhere. She was going to try being meek. She was going to try being quiet. And she was going to try being loud and brazen and in this white man's face. But she was going to get that 50 cents. And I think that is the key lesson of the book. Do not allow any other option but victory.
Love that. In closing, want to ask real quick, John, you mentioned The Secret, and it reminded me of a movie. Have either of you seen the movie The Secret?
I watched that every day for 200 days straight, so yes.
No, really?
Yeah.
So, John, have you seen it?
I maybe, but I'm not very good at remembering what I've watched. But it doesn't ring a bell.
Well, I can't tell you about it. It's a secret.
It's
no, that's not a joke. Well, I guess it was a joke. The book is, I'm sorry, the movie, The Secret, is straight away off the principles of Think and Grow Rich. So the reason I bring that up was just find out if either you watch it, and Nicky, somehow I'm not surprised you watched it 200 times. Talk about fanatical about this stuff, and it's worked out for you in your life, right?
That's good.
If our listeners are not book readers, don't shortcut yourself by just grabbing a summary on Google. Go watch the movie. And if you're not a book or a movie reader, then I'm not sure what to tell you. But at least we have another option for you, that if you don't want to read the book, go watch the movie The Secret, and it will reveal some of the secret, although it never says it directly. The entire movie long, it never says what the secret is, but you'll end up picking it up as you watch it, just like you find out what the secret is if you read this book, Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah. The only thing I want to say is I'm gonna push back. Everybody should read. I mean, if you're wanting to lead yourself to success, leaders are readers. And if you're not into reading, shame on you. Start being into reading. There's no reason not to read. Reading works. Reading will take you to the next level. Reading soothes the soul. And reading inspires you to be the best version of yourself. So don't be lazy and read. This is a book review show right now, book review segment that we're doing right now, right?
That's true. It's not a movie review.
It's not a movie review, right?
But you know what? I'll compliment and double click on both of you guys. If you're listening to this podcast and you've never read Think and Grow Rich, you must read it. Nicky's 100% correct. You got to get up and go read it. If you've read it, you got to read it again. And even if you've read it, you read it next week, still go watch The Secret and still keep learning on it, because this is a sharpening of the saw book that has been so instrumental, not in just our 3 lives, but in most entrepreneurs or people out there that believe in it. And it's the best-selling book of all time. So go read it.
Well, the Bible's the best-selling book of all time, but it's the best-selling personal development book of all time.
Fair.
But yeah, watching the movie The Secret is something you ought to do, but not instead of reading a book.
Let's call it supplemental. It's supplemental education to what is core to the book. Sounds like we agree there.
Yep.